So I take the plea, I take a 3-year plea, and I get 3 years for wire fraud. Once I took the wire fraud plea, I couldn't run the mortgage company anymore. And then I turned around and I started a development company. And we were going to start buying vacant lots in Ybor City and developing them, right? Which I did. We built several houses. But in the way to get the money for that was I was going to commit fraud. So I decided I'm going to start flipping properties, make some money flipping properties. But the problem with flipping properties is that you buy a property for 50, and this was 20 years ago. You buy a property for 50 grand in Ybor City, in like a low, in like whatever, Sulphur Springs, Ybor City, the shitty areas of Tampa. You could buy a house for 50 grand. You dump 30 grand in it or 25 grand and you sell it for 100 grand, right? You're going to make 25 grand. And that's if nothing goes wrong. That's if no crackheads steal the fucking, the AC units or fall off a window or knock the kids in the neighborhood, don't throw rocks through the window, whatever, all the things that happen. So, and it was like, okay. And the other problem with it is that, so I figure, okay, that's one problem. The house is barely appraised and you don't make a lot of money. So the other problem was the kind of people that buy those houses have bad credit and they don't have their down payments.
Right.
And they don't have good job history. So it's like, okay, so I figured first thing I did was I figured I got to get these houses to appraise higher. So I was dating, by this point I was in the middle of a divorce and I was dating this chick named Connie. And I asked her, how could if I buy a house for $50,000, I want it to show up for a sales price of, let's say, fucking $150,000, $200,000. How do I get that done? Because you just pay the extra doc stamps on the loan, the extra 0.007, right? So if you buy a house for $100,000, it's $700. If it's $50,000, it's $350, right? So she said, you're buying it for $50. You want it to show up for a sales price of $200. You just paid the extra $1,050. And it'll show up for $200,000 as a $200,000 sale. So that's what I start doing. I start getting the square footage and I start figuring, okay, $110, $120 a square foot, like I said, 20 years ago. And how do I get these things to start appraising higher so it looks right? So I figured that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start buying houses and get them. I'll buy it for whatever, 50 or 60 and have the sale show up for 210, 195, whatever. The other problem, so you think, oh, great, you can get them to appraise higher. Yeah, but nobody's buying those houses for that price. So I thought, okay, and even if they would buy them, they're not going to get qualified. So I figured, here's what I'm going to do. Because I was thinking, okay, well, you can just make W-2s and you can commit fraud to get these people in the houses. What do I want to do that?
Or you can go the easier route.
Correct. I just make
Which is what you do.
I just make these own. Well, first of all, here was my problem. I've got to renovate the property and sell it, which means I got to put at least 25, 30, maybe 40,000 to get it in good shape.
Yeah, if you do it the right way.
Right.
And probably more than that in some situations if you're buying in the crack neighborhoods.
But if nobody's going to live there, I really just have to paint the outside of the house and mow the yard.
Yeah. Do the cabinets really have to stay when you open the drawer? I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't even matter because you know what we're going to do? I'm going to get the appraiser to swap them out for photos from another fucking property.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. Well, the other problem was, okay, now nobody's buying this house. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create my own borrowers. Because if you think, okay, well, maybe you should just get your own people to do it and you can give them money back or give them this or that. Yeah, but I got to split the money. I got to give money back. It's too much. It's too many problems. And I'm already committing fraud.
Right.
So if you're going to commit there's no gray area. There's no little bit. Like
once you've done it, you've done it.
Right. You've done it. You might as well go all in. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to create fake borrowers. And so I figure I'll start making they now call them synthetic identities. We just called them like phantom borrowers. And what we did was I figured out how to go to Social Security. It took some time, but I figured out how to go to Social Security and get Social Security to issue Social Security numbers to children that don't exist. So I'd make a fake birth certificate, fake shot record, go in, fill out an SS5, say my kid was born with a midwife, not in a hospital, 10 months old, out of the country, never had a social security number issued, and they'd issue a social security number. They'd look it up, of course. They got the birth certificate, so they look it up and they go, oh, wow, you're right. He doesn't have a social security number, and they have one issued. 10 days later, I get in the mail. I then apply for credit cards in that name. The name, I obviously don't use the name, the correct year. I make it a 30-year-old guy, 32-year-old. I apply for secured credit cards. I get the secured credit cards. Whatever, $500 credit card, $1,000 credit card, $200 credit card, whatever. They show up, you make the payments, and in 6 months, it generates credit scores. And now you've got a guy who's got his own social security number. Obviously, I can prove he's been on his job for 5 or 6 years. He's made all of his payments to his landlady. He's got three trade lines on his credit, and he's got 700 plus credit scores. And so now I've got a viable buyer for this house with perfect scores. And that's what I do. I start creating these synthetic identities. I start buying houses in Ybor City within half a mile of each other.
Sure.
Some are practically across the street.
No, easy enough that you can control a neighborhood.
Right.
Or a street or a block.
Correct. So I brought the average Forbes said that I raised the average price in that area from like $150,000 to like $350,000.
No shit. And how long of a time?
Oh, that happened very quickly. 6 months to a year. I just know the year that they reviewed was like 2003.
Man, so you doubled the prices in a neighborhood in a short time.
So every one of these people, they're now buying these houses for 50. We got maybe 10 or 20,000 in it, so maybe 70. And then they're refinancing the house at the inflated value and getting a loan for 170, 190, 150. So they're making $100,000 on each transaction. Each borrower would buy 5 or 6 houses and refinance them, get a loan for 170, 180. And then of course, once their credit scores dropped, we'd of course go out and we'd get additional credit cards, personal loans. Maybe that's another 100,000, and then we'd stop paying the mortgages.
So I think the easy question for somebody like me is like, why didn't you just you found a way to buy the properties legitimately at the beginning, right? Because you're buying these cheap houses in a cheap neighborhood. Why didn't you just refinance them in your name like normal investors do?
Because of seasoning. Right.
So at that time, were all the banks wanting 6 to 12 months of like rent seasoning and things like that?
Yeah.
Or ownership seasoning?
Right.
Okay.
So and I'm sure I could have gone and bought them, and I could have bought them in my own name and recorded the value higher myself and then refinanced them. The problem was I was on probation.
Yeah.
And they're looking at your finances, and they're telling me not to get any additional. You know, I'm for fraud.
So besides wanting to max out the dollars that you can pull, because even if it was seasoned, even if you did a higher amount, you went to a bank and they said, yes, we'll give you the loan on it right now for what you paid on the HUD, or the Alta, whatever you want to call it. Still in $100,000, they're only giving you $85,000 on your purchase price, right?
Right.
So even if you jack it up $100,000, you're only going to make $80,000. You were looking to go for the bigger one. So what was each?
And I don't want to pay. Like, I don't want to have to do the renovations and rent them out.
You don't actually want to do it.
I don't want to do it. I want to get the money, have these things go into foreclosure, and have the bank not know what happened. I don't want the bank to even know they were defrauded.
Sure. What was a synthetic identity? How much was each one worth to you?
About $700,000.
That's before you had to shut it down because you let mortgages go back, and
yeah, you make $600,000 or $700,000 on each synthetic identity. So we borrowed $11.5 million in 18 months on that scam.
Now, there really wasn't like, when you talk about these synthetic identities, you weren't stealing the identities of people, right?
No,
or were you stealing real kids' identities, or were you just making them up?
No, not at that time. I was just making fake identity.
So the only victim at this point was the banks.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Because they got to foreclose on you.
Yeah.
Okay. And the credit card companies.
Yeah, which is banks. Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell.
So did you get caught doing this before you kind of went on to the next level of things?
I got caught. I only got caught. Got caught a couple times where people realized that it was a synthetic identity. Something was wrong, or they realized that these weren't real people.
Yeah.
One time, I had a account executive come in. No, it wasn't an account executive. I'm sorry. One of the brokers who'd done the loan for a guy named James Red. Well, it was the name I gave the guy. So she called me up and she said, "Look, Mary." No, that's not true. But let me think about how this happened. The account executive had gone to her and said, "Listen, the bank knows that something's wrong." And it wasn't James Red. That's another one. James Red, I'll tell you that one story too. That's funny. This was the guy, it was Alan Duncan. So I get a phone call from the broker and she's like, "Look, account executive, blah, blah, blah. Something's going on with Alan Duncan. He didn't make his first mortgage payment." So I had a partner that was supposed to make the guy's mortgage payment. He just never made it. I went and asked, I ran downstairs actually. He was living in my apartment building. I said, "Hey bro, did you make that payment?" He said, "No." So I called the bank and as Alan Duncan, and they were having a meeting. And so it was the fraud department, head of the fraud department, a lawyer for the bank, and the president of the bank. I put them on speakerphone. I'm like, "Hey, this is Alan Duncan." They're like, "I understand that I missed my first payment. I can get a cashier's check there right now." And they kind of like chuckle. And they're like, "That's funny, because you, Mr. Duncan, as far as we can tell, you don't exist." I'm like, "I'm sorry." They said, "Yeah, we called the bank, right? The bank, the bank was actually, I think I'd used like SunTrust. I used a real bank for him, I think, at that point. And they said that account doesn't exist, or it had just recently been opened, but they had several months of payment, whatever it was. That's not true." They said they had checked with the DMV, and the driver's license had never been issued, and they were waiting for a call back from Social Security. And what else? It was just like across the board, they'd really, really figured it out.
Because this time you weren't covering all your tracks.
I mean, I was covering, it was a learning process, right? Like I'm covering my tracks slowly as it goes. And regardless, I also, they pulled like a 4506, like there's no these W-2s or pay stubs they've never been filed with the IRS. It's like, fuck. So I'm like, "All right, well, where would he getting at?" And they were like, "Well, obviously this is fraud. We're going to contact the FBI." I said, "Okay, well, look, why don't you just let me get the money back? Nobody has to call the FBI." And they said, "Oh, well, we'll get the money back when we foreclose on the property." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "So you think the property's worth $180,000 or whatever it was on the appraisal?" They said, "Yeah, we have an appraisal right here." I said, "Do you have it with you in front of you?" Yeah. I said, "Open it up." I said, "You see a comp number 1?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Look that comp up." I said, "It is in the name of a guy named Lee Black." Look up comp number 2. It's in the name of a guy named Brandon Green. Comp number 3 is in the name of a guy named James Red. I said, Black, Red, Green. I said, as you can clearly see, I said, I created those comparable sales. And they were like, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, and they were arguing, blah, blah, blah. And, "Oh, well, when the FBI gets a hold of you, we'll get our money back." And because I said, "Look, you're about to lose $100,000.
Sure.
By the time by the time you foreclose, crackheads will have gone in there, stolen all the copper, knocked out all the windows and everything." I said, "It's in a horrible area." I said, you'll end up selling that property for what I bought it for, which was probably $40,000. You've lent whatever, 160, 170. I said, "So yeah, you're going to lose 100,000 easily." And I said, "Or you can agree not to contact the FBI and let me pay you back." And so they said, I remember they put me on hold, and they came back and they go, "You still have the money?" And I just remember thinking, "Oh yeah, I got them."
Yeah.
So I paid them back, and they never contacted the FBI. I actually went and got a cashier's check, mailed them the cashier's check, called 2 days later when they actually got it, and I said, "Are we good?" They said, "We're good." They said, "Don't." But and the guy said, "Like, don't ever use this bank again." I said, "Absolutely not, absolutely not."
At least not under that name.
Right. And so that was one time I got caught. Hands down, got caught. Never said anything. They never did anything.
Now, were you afraid at that point though? Were you nervous, or because you have an overexuberance of confidence,
Right.
and
But I was
arrogance?
terrified.
But you were scared at that point.
Yeah. But I was. What choice did I have?
But what did this situation do for your confidence when you figured out?
Of course, every time you get away with it, you become emboldened.
Right.
Like you'd think, okay, you know what? I'm closing up shop. I almost got caught. I got away with it. Whew, okay, that was it. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go sell used cars. I'm going to get myself a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm going to stop dating this chick that's costing me too much. I'm no more traveling. No, that's not what happens at all. I thought, I'm that good.
Right.
Almost got caught in fight. That was easy. That was a 10-minute phone call.